right. Good morning. Little hard to compete with a presidential candidate on the main stage over there, but we will do our best to keep you entertained. My name is Shannon McGriff, and I am the Executive Director of the Energy Professionals Association, also known as TIPA. And just to give you a little background of the association, TIPA was founded in 2005 and is a national industry advocacy association dedicated to advancing competitive energy markets across the country. So our membership is made up of aggregators, brokers, consultants, retail energy providers, and affiliated energy providers. And we have about 12,000 individual members, around 200 companies. And about 82% of all retail energy transactions are negotiated through TIPA members. So just a little bit of background about our association. We're obviously a big advocate for free energy markets. We think that it continues to help push forward the mining industry and want to be partners with all parties interested. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. We had a last minute swap. You might notice that Russell is not Carol. So Russell, we'll go ahead and start with you with a brief introduction.
Thanks. Russell Cannon with Core Scientific. Core operates 7 mining facilities in 5 states. We have 724 megawatts up and running right now. I got a shout out because I actually have some Core folks out here. I have my CTO, my EVP of Technology Operations, and I have the guys that actually run the site that Dennis was just talking about. We did the tour yesterday. They come in. So thanks for having us here.
Awesome. AJ?
Hey, I represent GDA. I'm the head of North America for Genesis Digital Assets. We have 11 data centers in the US and 19 globally, majority in Texas, North Carolina, and South Carolina. I'm a power and infrastructure guy, clean energy, and Bitcoin enthusiast.
Perfect. And Matt?
Everybody, I'm Matt Prusak with US Bitcoin Corp. We have mines in Nebraska, New York, and Texas, about 730 megawatts across all of our sites. Good to be here.
Perfect. Thanks to all of you.
Just to point out, there's gigawatts of mining going on just right here on the stage. So it's pretty significant.
There's more. Actually, it would be, by my mental math here, I think there's more energy on the stage than the entire country of Kenya uses, as an example. So, we're keeping busy.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. This panel is called Grid Citizenship. And so we'll start with a, kind of a softball question here. And Russell, let's go ahead and start with you. How do you see Bitcoin miners contributing positively to local economies?
So that is a softball question. So I'm going to use our oldest site that we have in Marble, North Carolina. And I like it because we've been there a few years now. We mined the first Bitcoin there in January of 18. We went into a facility that was an abandoned textile thread factory that had been vacant for years, for over a decade. And Marble's a town of 300. We employ more than 30 people there. Our median pay there is over $60,000, which means we're more than twice the median income for that little county. And then we buy our energy there from TVA. So we curtail with TVA, we go back and forth with TVA, but there's a co-op there, and we pay that co-op a little override fee. And if you drive around the county over the past 5 years, you'll see new substations, you'll see new transformers, and you'll see new transmission lines. And you can also talk to folks and ask them what their co-op rebate check has done. It has gone up dramatically because we use enough energy. And by the way, that energy comes from hydro dams, so that's energy that would be wasted and going into the ground anyway. So for TVA, it's a variable cost. It's variable revenue going into TVA, and for the co-op, it's money they would not have, and that really makes a difference in that town. So the co-op rebates has lowered the power bill for all the folks, but we took an abandoned what was a textile factory, and we actually have a lot of tech folks there, and it's made a remarkable difference in that town. And you're seeing it right here. Our folks in Denton, we're hiring kids right out of college, right there in Denton, to come to our facilities. Now we also hire kids right out of high school too. So you can come out if you're very skilled with your hands, we can go through one of our trainings here. So we try to be a good citizen in all of our locations.
AJ, do you have anything to add?
No, we have a similar story in West Texas where we have our biggest data center in the town of Piot. The town of Piot has around 81 citizens. We had 500 construction jobs at peak on this site, and currently we employ around 55 people. And we collaborated with the local ISD and really, trying to develop new skill development, right? Trying to get the high school graduates into internships and training them into the IT and how to manage the miners, how to service the miners. So really creating an alternate skill as well as paying taxes. And, we are the biggest taxpayers in Ward County.
And Matt?
Yeah, I think we can echo some of those points. So in terms of development, similarly, job creation has been fantastic. We'll do everything from sponsoring the local barbecue to the 4th of July party for the county judge, things like that. And then in the renewal side, is very similarly, we took over a brownfield site in Niagara Falls, New York, hydro-powered. It used to be a sodium refinery. And, after NAFTA, the former owner left and offshored all the jobs and just left all the infrastructure there. And we went and rejuvenated everything, hired folks back, and we're now running a clean Bitcoin mine there.
That's great. So how do you approach energy sourcing to ensure ethical and sustainable practices? And Matt, let's start with you.
Certainly. So I think there's really two key components of that. One is pricing and the other is carbon footprint, right? So on the pricing side, obviously we're looking for the cheapest electron we can harness, we can find. So typically these are going to be like a depressed node. So in the case of West Texas, there's maybe an overabundance of wind power during parts of the day. So there's kind of a peak issue. And so we can come in there and harness that otherwise spilled or wasted energy. And then in terms of carbon footprint, I think similarly, we're conscious of this. We've gone out, whether it's wind or hydropower, we're trying to find sources that allow us to keep as clean an operation as possible. Now, there's still thermal baseload, so we're not yet perfect, but we're striving to have a better carbon footprint every year.
AJ?
Well, we have a similar story as USBTC, but another aspect of energy sourcing is the location of your data centers and where you integrate those load to the grid. And we are in West Texas, where is almost 11 gigawatts of renewables, but you don't have enough load there in West Texas. Neither you have those big res lines that can transmit that amount of power into different areas of ERCOT. So we kind of integrate as a good load, right? And an essential demand response, ancillary services, kind of a resource to ERCOT.
Russell?
So we're grid. So talk about sustainability. We're grid connected at every single megawatt. So all 724 megawatts we're running right now is all grid connected. So we actually, from a sustainability perspective, we're grid. So whatever the carbon footprint is of the grid. But I actually think it's important that we are grid connected because our investment in the grid is the fact that we're buying energy for the most part that has zero variable input cost. A power company, when they're wanting to sell us power, and as Matt said, we're looking for that very cheap power. The very, very cheap power comes from either nuclear that's underutilized, hydro that's underutilized, wind, or solar. Everything else has a fuel input cost. Matter of fact, natural gas fuel input cost is what caused a whole ruckus of problems for us last year and still to this year. So as being grid connected, because we add revenue to the grid, we're actually adding a variable revenue that has very low cost, and that's an investment in the grid. An investment in the grid is a good thing because when we upgrade transmission lines, when we upgrade substations, we upgrade transfer points on our system, it actually improves the efficiency of the whole grid. And when you're talking to a power generation company, if they're looking, and I'm sure we're going to get into the part that we act like a battery, right? Because we curtail all the time, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But when they look to add additional capacity, because we're willing to come in and add curtailable load, they're going to add capacity that is inexpensive to add. And the most inexpensive power you can add is a sustainable power base that has a zero variable input cost.
Yeah, and I think that kind of segues well into our next topic, and that's sharing your perspective on how grid balancing and mining can actually contribute to stabilizing the grid. AJ, you want to start for that?
Sure. I mean, grid balancing. I mean, if you see in the summer months, the electricity prices can hype up to like $4,000 a megawatt hour. Bitcoin miners can curtail within the matter of seconds, right? So we do price response, we do voluntary curtailments, and it's the way to kind of integrate the load to the grid, where we are not a strain on the grid. At the same time, we are absorbing the stranded power that otherwise will not be utilized, will go wasted from those renewables and hydro, nuclear sources. At the same time, giving back the power. I think it's pretty, standard across all the Bitcoiners.
And Matt, what about you about bringing more reliability to the grid?
Yeah, I think you have to work with the grid and with the regulators as well. And I think that a lot of load has come on very quickly if you look at the kind of the advent of industrial scale Bitcoin miners. And so, it's very important for us that regardless of whether we're in New York or Texas, whatever the grid, that we're working with the referee as well as the other players so that nothing goes awry, right? And actually, we can really position ourselves as an ally, right? With scaling up, scaling down, working through different events that may or may not happen on the grid so that we're able to stabilize it. And coming with solutions as opposed to just saying we're going to come take all your energy is a much better mindset to have.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, so it's the fact, and all of us do this, we have that very curtailable load. And the curtailment happens a couple different ways. We have forced curtailment, we have voluntary curtailment, we have economic curtailment. And in the forced curtailment, actually right here in Texas, with two prime examples. A couple years ago, we had a winter storm, didn't have a whole lot of Bitcoin miners here. The ones we had, like our friends at Riot, they curtailed. Our friends at Rhodium, they curtailed. With this past December, the whole country went under a winter storm. At Core, we curtailed for 3 or 4 days every site in our portfolio except for North Dakota, because it's cold in North Dakota anyways, right? But that's a very good, that's a real benefit to the grid, because when we turn off that power, that base load generation, we turn off, that allows it to go right back to the grid. And I want to point out, like in August when it was super hot, we curtailed 69,000 megawatt hours. That's just a crazy amount. Now, a lot of that was not forced. Some of that was economic curtailment. As he said, we watch the prices. Here in Texas, we watch the prices every 5 minutes, right? And we can actually watch the market as we turn off and on our sites. And we use software to help us do this, so we actually don't create our own demand, right? So when you turn back on, because when you turn off for economic curtailment, you turn back on for as the prices go back down again. If you turn on too much, you actually cause problems for the grid. So it's the economic curtailment, it's the generation. It's also things like harmonics on the grid, right? Like voltage and stuff. That stuff's important. But unless you're electrical engineer responsible for the grid, it's not something you think about.
And I think this isn't something that we talked about in our preparation call, but we're kind of preaching to the choir here, right? We all in this audience probably understand how this works. How do you get that message out to the public who are reading articles about how Bitcoin miners are coming in and taking all the load and they're not going to have power at home because, Texas is bringing in this heavy of a load? What can we do better to make sure that message is getting out?
So when we speak to policymakers, this comes up a lot, right? And again, it just comes down to education, right? You have a lot of folks that, Bitcoin has found them or found their market. They didn't necessarily find Bitcoin, and you need to meet them on their terms and explain to them, particulars of the grid that they might not otherwise know. To your point, like grid harmonics are not, taught in middle school. I mean, people don't have any background on this, right? And, we found ourselves engaging with county commissioners in parts of Texas, county judges. You have to meet people where they're at. And so I think trying to help explain to them, no, we're not stealing electrons. Electricity is neither created nor destroyed. You can go as elementary in physics as you want, but it's really about meeting people where they're at.
Yeah. AJ, do you have anything to add?
No, I fully agree with Matt. That's what we do.
Yeah. Russell?
It's education. It's education in the media, and it's education for your politicians. And for politicians, it's like I said, it's the local, it's the county commissioners, and it's all the way up to Congress. And a lot of times, if you sit down and can get a whiteboard with them and can explain it to them, you can see the aha moment. Mm-hmm. And then say, well, this is actually good for the grid. Yes, that's right. It's very good for the grid. But it takes a lot to get there. And I think the natural headline is not that.
Speaking to Texas specifically, post-winter storm, hardly anybody knew what I used to do for a living, including my family. And now, post-winter storm, everyone, the minute there's an alert, it's, oh no, are we losing power? And I'm like, I wish nobody knew what I did still. I really liked those days. So
the grid is small talk. It's been challenging.
It's now, yes, along with the weather, right? All right. So how does your operation handle power demands during peak and off-peak hours to help minimize that impact to the grid? Sure. Start with you.
I think to Russell's point, we use software, so we're not necessarily physically watching the tape here, but the goal, and this goes back to the education, is we're the most price sensitive in a way, right? When it comes to price spikes and things like that, we're the first load to turn off, right? We don't have the same business interruption problems as some of the other industries and things like that, and so we're getting increasingly adept at being responsive, and so the more we can fine tune our grid response to match the situation, the cleaner those events will become, right? We're able to really dial up, dial down, slow machines, speed machines up, do whatever it takes to keep our operations stable, and we're incentivized to do so. So it's a process, but we're getting increasingly sophisticated in how we manage.
AJ?
Adding up to Matt, it's not only the price response thing. We provide ability to ERCOT, to curtail us, like forced curtailments with under frequency relays and all those kind of things, which are completely in control of ERCOT. If the frequency dips or it's overriding, they can trip our load. So that's in addition to, how we manage our curtailment through our softwares and, price response policies.
So one interesting thing is we talk about the fact that we all use software now, and we have some of our great tech people who have developed software. Our load is so unique to the grid that when we first started, it wasn't software. It was literally an email from the grid saying, here's what the next prices are. It was a call to us. It was a call to the data center, and it was literally, hard going down because we have such a curtailable load. The grid's not used to that. You can't call up a smelting plant and tell them you're going to turn them off in 3 seconds. It just doesn't work that way. So it's not just an education for media and politician, but over the years, the grid is starting to really like folks like us. But it's getting more sophisticated with software and that kind of stuff. Because we were just so unique when we were added to the grid. Duke used to send us over 24 hours in advance. Here's what the hourly rates are going to be, and theirs was based on the weather forecast in Charlotte. Because if Bank of America got hot in the summertime, they needed more power. So, but now it's a lot more sophisticated because they've learned we can respond automatically with seconds. Their fingers can dip into our software, turn us off within seconds, and more, as importantly, we can go right back up within seconds. And that is not a load that exists in any other industry on the planet. And by the way, the rest of the world is figuring that out very fast. So America, we need to get our act together on this because Bitcoin miners like us, we're being recruited to other countries that say we need Bitcoin miners to fund our grid. And they're making it very attractive. So if there's other countries saying we're going to use Bitcoin miners to fund our grid development, America needs to go, wait a minute. If it's so attractive to the whole rest of the world, maybe we need to think about how attractive it can be to us, especially in parts of the country where we need to have infrastructure developed ourselves.
So since the panel title is Grid Citizenship, what opportunities do you see for miners to engage in active grid citizenship beyond just being consumers of electricity? And AJ, I think we talked about this on our call. So why don't we start with you?
There are two things what we have done. So since we are all grid connected, as part of those improvements that the utility is doing to their substations, they're adding more capacitive devices that reduces the losses in the grid, that increase the power factor, and that basically enhances the capacity of that grid to supply power. So it's making the grid more resilient, and we fund those improvements, right, as part of our interconnection fees. And on top of that, we have a project where there was a stranded interconnection, a coal power plant that was retired north of Texas. We went there and we saw an opportunity. The worst thing is that, you just keep that infrastructure stranded where millions and millions of taxpayer money has been paid. So we put a data center out there and, bringing the jobs back that were lost when AEP shut down the power plant. So those are the kind of things that we have contributed as being a better grid.
Matt?
It's interesting. I think a lot of focus is often put on the SEC or the CTFC as regulators that we need to work with. I would love there to be more of a dialogue with the Department of Energy. You've got several gigawatts now of load. We're a pretty meaningful constituent. And to date, there's not yet been a lot of dialogue back and forth with that group. And I don't want to necessarily bring in the feds, but I think the SEC gets a lot of attention, and they're doing their best, or I hope. And the CTFC is also trying to keep up. But from the Office of Electricity, for example, at the Department of Energy, we could be such a great ally. So that's where I see things going, is really being seen as an energy partner, more so than just as a kind of a token as the Fed perceives us now.
Let's just put some numbers on it. Just quick math in my head. This group up here will spend $1 billion next year on power. $1 billion. If you add in a couple more of our friends that I see actually literally back here, just a few more miners, that number becomes billions of dollars annually we spend on power. And the biggest point you need to make there is that's money that gets reinvested in the grid. That's profits that these power companies are using to build more generation, build better generation, build more efficient generation. That's profit that goes in the new substations, it goes in the new transmission. So, we are, not only are we a big client for the grid, we have so much variability for the grid. We're a good client. We're the kind of client they want buying that power. So as far as citizenship goes, we're paying for the grid that grandma doesn't have to pay for. Not just one grandma, tens and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of grandmas don't have to pay cost to upgrade their grid because we're paying for that cost to upgrade the grid.
Perfect. We've covered a lot of the topics that we discussed. One last note we had in our pre-call was talking about how the data centers are enabling the energy transition. And I think we've kind of hit on that throughout this conversation. But between the energy transition, sustainability, reliability. I mean, kind of, last thoughts before we open it up to the audience for some questions and make this a little more interactive. Russell, let's start with you.
I just say, for our grid providers, and again, we're grid connected in 5 states, seven different data centers, 8 or 9 different. I'd have to count the number of power providers we're tied with too. But when those folks are looking at their generation capacity and they look at us and they look at adding new generation, all that generation is going to be sustainable, because that is the most affordable new generation you can supply. Now, we all still need base load, right? And you can't have base load from a solar farm. That doesn't work. But when you pair it with nuclear and hydro and wind, you wake up one day and you have a grid that works and it's very sustainable.
AJ?
Well, if you see in West Texas and the Panhandle area, there are lots of wind that is curtailed during the night because, operating that power, the wind energy is negative, right? So they'll pay you to use the electricity. And if you look at, so most of the farms are curtailed, right? So if you co-locate a Bitcoin load next to them, we can make that wind generation profitable, right? And it can be fed to the grid, and that's how, help the energy transition.
Matt?
I think on energy transition, new forms of energy are under development, right? You've got geothermals up and coming. You've got some very interesting new forms of solar, things like that. And something that I try and push for us is to be a customer first resort, right? So we want these new energy tech kind of startups and the like to work with us, right? To be a guaranteed off taker. We're forward thinking. We buy energy by the gigawatt now, right? And we really want new and better forms of electricity that are clean to be developed. And so there's an opportunity for us to play a leadership role in the innovation space on energy as well.
I'll open it up for questions. I don't know if we have a mic for the audience. If not, I'm happy to kind of walk around and help. Does anybody have any questions or comments for our panelists?
Kind of open question for everybody. As Bitcoin mining kind of evolves into kind of more of the energy arbitrage game like you guys were talking about, talk a little bit about how impactful that revenue stream is to the business for those energy arbitrage, the demand responses and things like that.
I'll take a stab at it first. I think when I initially signed up to be an industrial scale Bitcoin miner, at the time I didn't think that would require a working knowledge of like a land war in Europe, right, with the Ukraine situation. But that was very important, right? Suddenly LNG prices were spiking and they were dropping, they were spiking, they were dropping. And we needed to really evolve in our sophistication when it came to energy and energy politics, frankly. And I think that's something that as we look ahead, it's only getting more complicated, right? I think LNG is still somewhat domestic. We've got some import-export terminals as an example, but the level of sophistication that we need to step up is we're not in the big leagues now on the electron arbitrage game, and we have to have a house view on LNG prices, electrons in West Texas, you name it. There has to be the beginning of a house view, or we'll get decked again with another spike.
I'll add a little bit there. So the more sophisticated we get, and the more tied into the grid we get, we as a industry have to develop those strategies. There's 8,600 hours in the year, and at core, where our goal is to transform energy into high value compute. And you have to look at every single hour and say, okay, does the grid need that power? Economically, you can look and see if it needs that power, or do we need that power to transform it into valuable compute? And that compute could be Bitcoin mining, it could be large language models, at one point it was smart contracts. So yes, I think the hedging strategies and the power strategies are going to become more complex, and they're going to become incredibly important to our business model. Because when we first started, it was all about just how much uptime could you have, how many hours in a day can you mine Bitcoin. But as our industry gets more competitive and we have more compute globally around, it's not about how much uptime you have, it's how efficient you can be. So you have to be very efficient. And that efficiency is measured in many cases, on the 5-minute increment. And it's how much, if it's Bitcoin, what's that Bitcoin worth? What's my input cost? And you have to make those decisions. So I think we as an industry are getting a lot more complex, but we're also addressing it with better business models. So I think we're going to get, not this halving, but by the next halving, we're going to have to be really hand in glove with the entire energy sector.
Yeah, at the very end, I heard you say hand in glove with the energy sector. That's what I was going to ask. Do you see any energy generation companies mining Bitcoin themselves, or do you think the Bitcoin miners are going to start generating energy?
Both. I think miners I mean, at a certain level, we combine chips and electricity, right? And so chips and electricity. And so there's always a temptation to vertically integrate into either chips or into electricity. And for now, you're predominantly seeing potentially integration into electricity, right? Where the miners, some of the flare gas folks are probably the earliest tremors of that, where you're seeing people go to the source of the gas in the ground and hooking that right up to miners effectively. At the industrial level, probably like large-scale generators, independent power producers, the IPPs, baby steps. It's a pretty conservative group, but they're increasingly seeing the dollar signs, and I think there's some intrigue there.
Yeah, I've seen the Bitcoin miners get into just mining right at the gas well. But is it happening at all yet for any Bitcoiners getting into power generation into the grid?
Well, I mean, Stronghold is an example. Some folks have taken over power plants, old coal or gas plants, as a pretty heavy-handed way to get into power. I don't know of anyone who's building a wind farm or a solar farm yet, but for the baseload, people are moving that direction. Some miners are.
Can we kind of talk about the future after Bitcoin mining, what your guys' plan is, AI, cloud storage, things like that?
I'll take a stab at that.
I know it's open-ended, but
I hope to be retired pretty soon, so I want Bitcoin to run to about 500,000, and then you guys aren't going to see me again. I'll be on a little coastal island off South Carolina, deep sea fishing on the weekends. But I mentioned this. So at Core, we really look at ourselves as transforming energy into high-value compute. And that high-value compute, the next stage of that is going to be large language models. There's a lot of large language models to be processed. And the interesting thing about that is that's very dense. Those GPUs have to be very dense in order to process those things. They have to be all in one location. So that looks a lot like the power that power footprint looks a lot more like the power footprint that we're used to with Bitcoin mining than, say, the power footprint of a traditional cloud provider or a traditional data center provider. Certainly, it's much bigger than any edge data center. So I think you're going to see, and by the way, I'm not up here telling you that Bitcoin miners can become a tier 3, 2N data center operator. It's two very different skill sets. But I will say the power footprints can lend it to that. So I do think smart contracts, I think distributed AI, distributed large language models, all those are possibilities. But again, the skill sets are somewhat different. The one thing that Bitcoin miners are very good at is engineering and moving fast. And I'm saying every company in bankrupt, we fail fast, we recover fast from it, we make mistakes and we learn from them. And in the world of large language models and generative AI, it's moving so fast. The parallels are uncanny if you look at what's going on in that space right now. So that's definitely an area where you're going to see folks operate.
Yeah, earlier you said that other countries are seeing the benefit of grid stabilization from Bitcoin mining. Do you have an example of a country that is like courting this?
I can give a couple examples. You actually operate internationally. Okay.
Well, we have data centers in Sweden. We have a lot of interest from Nordic countries, a lot of interest in the Middle East. Abu Dhabi is a front runner into being a Bitcoin miner. Oman has recently announced their ambitions to, be a big Bitcoin miner as well. And if you look about the African continent, where, it's really Bitcoin plays as a hedge against inflation, right? A lot of economic activity through Bitcoin is coming up in Africa.
I'll give you two primary examples. In Paraguay, there's a 20 gigawatt dam, right? And it's going to take a long time and a lot of money to pipe all that power over to Sao Paulo, where they want to really sell it. But until that time, Paraguay's recruiting Bitcoin miners to say, come belly up right beside the dam and we'll give you power. Ethiopia's doing the same thing. Ethiopia has a 5 or 6 gigawatt dam that's only using one right now. And they actually just a month and a half ago had a conference bringing Bitcoin miners in, worked with the U.S. Department of Commerce to say, hey, what can we offer to bring Bitcoin miners in? So Africa's a very good example. South America's a very good example. The Middle East, those folks want to become food independent. So they want to build greenhouses all over the place, all over the desert, and they got to have a lot of power to do that and using Bitcoin mining to pay for some of that power growth. But we're talking those folks are looking like 20, 30 years out. So the rest of the world is seeing it. China just turned on 200 gigawatts of solar. Now, I know they got out of Bitcoin mining a few years ago, but in China, you can Bitcoin mine as long as you convert your Bitcoin to Chinese digital yuan every day. So, countries are figuring out that the variable load that we have is very attractive, because we can belly up right beside some generation and just pay them money until it's all used up.
I'll add one more point to it. So other than the Bitcoin mining, I mean, what we create is a lot of electrical infrastructure, hundreds of millions of dollars, right, that generate economic activity. And as the gentleman was saying about AI, machine learning, all these are prospects that can come in future that can be hosted on that electrical infrastructure. So, from that perspective, it's interesting for countries to have Bitcoin miners come and put that infrastructure and connect it to the grids.
Awesome. We're getting yelled at by the red screen. So just as a quick closeout, I know Russell said you'll be retired, but if we're back here in 10 years, at the 10-year anniversary of this summit, what's your mic drop moment? What are we talking about?
I think Bitcoin miners are going to be in all kinds of stuff. We're going to look as much like energy traders as anything else. I think you're going to see campuses that are mining Bitcoin and also doing distributed large language models. I think you're going to see Bitcoin miners either very big or very small. In the middle is going to have a hard time. You could be very profitable operating very small things, just like in data centers. You can operate a small edge data center and make tons of money off of it. On the other side, you can do it as a big, and in the middle, you need to figure out what you're doing. So,
AJ?
Well, I think, as he said, there'll be a lot of, I would say we'll not have to do this education, right? And the youngsters that are going to perhaps school right now, they will be graduating into and inventing new technologies that will benefit Bitcoin, that will benefit the way we mine Bitcoin. I mean, we have been talking about, migrating from machines to chips, and all those things will unfold, I guess, in times to come.
Matt?
I think the stakeholders on stage will change a bit. I think you're going to see more traditional power folks enter the space, and they'll be alongside the miners, and it's going to be you either got 10 megawatts that are very profitable or 10 gigawatts, and not a whole lot in the middle, just the way the industry's kind of spiking, but I'm excited to see what happens.
Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, guys.
Hey guys, thanks for coming out to the 2023 North American Blockchain Summit. It was the best summit yet. We look forward to hosting you again next year. If you enjoyed the summit or like what you saw in this video, be sure to subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about membership in the TBC, go to texasblockchaincouncil.org to learn more.